Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging into a really complex and fast-moving situation. It's dominating headlines everywhere. I'm talking about the recent escalation between Iran and Israel. We've pulled together quite a stack of recent reports for you. We're looking at outlets like the New York Post, the Guardian, Times of India, the Wall Street Journal, and also some background from Wikipedia. The idea is to help you cut through all the noise, really get a handle on what's happening. So our mission for this deep dive: extract the most important bits of knowledge, the key insights, give you a clear picture of the events, the global reactions, and, crucially, the immediate human cost.
Exactly. It's not just about what happened, but really understanding why it matters, giving you that context you need to sort of navigate all the different perspectives out there and the critical details that sometimes get lost in the daily news cycle.
Okay, great. So let's unpack this. We should probably start by tracing the timeline, right? How things unfolded recently. Let's rewind just a little bit to June 13th. That's when Israel kicked off Operation Rising Lion. Now, this involved large-scale airstrikes and also covert support from Mossad, drone sabotage deep inside Iran. Can you tell us a bit more about what Israel was targeting there? What was the rationale?
Yeah, what's really fascinating here, I think, is the precision and the nature of the targets. They went after Iranian nuclear and missile infrastructure, specifically sites like Natanz and Arak.
Natanz and Arak, key sites.
Very key. Natanz for uranium enrichment, Arak, the heavy water facility. It really highlights a focus on strategic assets. It sends a message. It suggests Israel wanted to directly degrade Iran's capabilities, not just rely on covert stuff or diplomacy anymore.
Right, a very direct signal. And here's where it gets really interesting, because the response was almost immediate. Our sources say on that exact same day, June 13th, Iran retaliated.
Instantly.
We're talking over 150 ballistic missiles.
Yeah.
And more than 100 drones fired into Israel. That's a huge barrage.
Yeah.
What was the immediate impact of that initial retaliation?
Well, the initial reports indicated around 22 civilians were injured, and there was damage caused too, obviously.
Okay.
So it demonstrates a significant response, even if it wasn't perhaps broadly lethal right at the start. But more importantly, I think, it really set a new stage for the conflict. The sheer scale of it, the directness state on state that was new.
A definite shift from proxy conflicts.
Exactly. This was the first major direct military clash between the two states, a huge leap.
Okay, so that was the 13th. Then things escalated further, didn't they?
Yeah.
Between June 18th and 19th. What happened next? What do the sources say?
Well, reports indicate Iran then launched missiles, apparently at Israeli civilian sites, including a hospital in Beersheba that caused dozens of injuries.
A hospital, wow.
Yeah. And in response, Israel targeted Iran's Kandab nuclear site, another key facility, and other critical installations.
That shift towards civilian targets, like the hospital,
Yeah.
that's a really serious escalation.
It is.
When you connect this to the bigger picture, what does it tell us?
It's clear the civilian toll started climbing significantly on both sides during this phase. Our sources, like the Post and Guardian, put the figures at over 600 civilian casualties in Iran and around 200 plus in Israel.
600 and 200 plus. Those are devastating numbers.
They are. And this shift towards civilian targets, it really changes the dynamics, doesn't it? It raises the stakes dramatically, makes finding a way out much harder, inflicts pain, tries to break resolve.
A very dangerous turn indeed. So as these tensions were flaring up, how did other nations start responding? Let's turn our attention to India for a moment. Sources indicate that on June 18th, India launched something called Operation Sindhu. What was the immediate objective there?
Operation Sindhu was primarily an evacuation effort, urgent. They were focused on getting Indian citizens out of Iran, especially students.
Okay.
The first flight actually landed back in New Delhi on June 19th, brought 110 Indians home, though it's worth noting, estimates suggest about 4,000 Indians are still in Iran.
Right, so an ongoing concern. And beyond just getting citizens out, what was India's official diplomatic stance? Did they take a side?
No, India's Ministry of External Affairs, the MEA, they strongly urged, quote, immediate de-escalation. They pushed for restraint, really advocating for diplomacy to, prevent a wider conflict.
So firmly neutral.
Yes, their official stance has remained very neutral, very diplomatic. The focus clearly on civilian safety and stability. It's a deliberate balancing act for India.
Makes sense. What about the broader strategic concerns for India in a crisis like this? What's really at stake for them?
Well, India is watching the impact on energy markets very, very closely, and also crucial trade routes, particularly the stability of oil supplies coming out of the Gulf.
Right. Energy security is huge for India.
Absolutely. It just highlights how these regional conflicts can have massive economic ripple effects worldwide. For a major energy importer like India, Gulf stability is, well, it's paramount.
Okay. So while nations like India were pushing for diplomacy, uh, other voices were entering the conversation with a, let's say, different tone. Our sources picked up on a series of pretty combative remarks from former President Trump.
Yes, they did.
What specific claims did he make about Iran's nuclear capabilities?
He claimed Iran was just, quote, a few weeks away from getting nukes.
A few weeks.
Yeah. Now, it's important for you, the listener, to know that according to the sources we looked at, this claim was widely disputed by U.S. intelligence at the time. The intelligence assessment suggested a longer timeline than that.
Okay, so a disputed claim. He also had some very strong words for both sides, didn't he? What did he say about the Israeli strikes? And what was his message directly to Iran?
He praised the Israeli strikes, called them excellent,
Yeah.
and he urged Iran to, quote, make a deal now. He warned them of even more brutal attacks if they didn't take the offer.
Make a deal now or face worse. Very direct.
Extremely direct. He went even further, actually. Demanded Iran's unconditional surrender. And he even called on Iranian civilians to evacuate Tehran.
Wow. Calling for civilians to evacuate a capital city. That's highly unusual rhetoric.
Very unusual, very escalatory language.
Did he suggest any potential U.S. involvement? Military involvement?
Yes, he did suggest the U.S. might intervene. He mentioned military forces being repositioned in the region, though our sources, particularly the Wall Street Journal, were clear that no formal deployment had actually been confirmed at that point.
Okay. So the suggestion was there, but no confirmation. What's the potential impact of that kind of public rhetoric on a situation that's already so volatile?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? Public statements like that, especially from a major figure like a former U.S. president, they can really complicate things. They might embolden one side or further inflame tensions on the other. It just adds another layer of unpredictability.
Yeah, makes diplomatic efforts much harder, I imagine.
Absolutely. It potentially raises the stakes for everyone involved.
Okay, let's pivot back now to the human element, the human cost. We've talked about the rising casualty figures. What do our sources tell us about daily life? Let's start with Israel. What's it like on the ground there amidst these ongoing missile sirens?
Well, reports, particularly from The Guardian, confirm that missile sirens are basically a daily reality across Israel now. Targets have included hospitals, as we mentioned, but also residential areas, other civilian infrastructure.
Constant disruption and fear.
Exactly. The confirmed dead or injured figure in Israel is somewhere between 224 and 263 people. Daily life is severely disrupted. There are airspace closures, evacuations happening, especially in the south.
And what about the situation for civilians inside Iran, dealing with the impact of the Israeli strikes?
Well, with over 600 reported civilian casualties there, the disruption is obviously just as profound, if not more so. Getting detailed, on-the-ground reports from inside Iran can be more challenging, but the humanitarian situation is clearly deteriorating rapidly in both countries.
It's truly heartbreaking, just the scale of suffering on both sides. What about public sentiment inside Israel, in any preparations for what might come next?
Sources mention a fierce anti-war sentiment growing alongside these humanitarian concerns. People are suffering. But at the same time, the Israeli military appears to be preparing for further retaliatory strikes, possibly targeting more governmental sites within Iran this time.
So potentially the cycle continues.
It seems that way. And if you connect this back to the bigger picture, it just highlights the immense human cost and, the sheer challenge of finding a way to de-escalate once this kind of cycle of violence really gets going.
A tragic illustration of how quickly things can spiral. So we've journeyed through this rapid, really alarming escalation between Iran and Israel. We've looked at the global ripple effects like India's response, specific political statements like Trump's, and we've touched on the grim reality unfolding on the ground in both nations.
Yeah, and what you've really heard today, I think, underscores this incredibly complex interplay, doesn't it? You've got the military actions, the sort of delicate dance of diplomacy or lack thereof sometimes. You've got major economic concerns, and then this powerful, often inflammatory rhetoric. It all feeds into a truly volatile situation.
It really is, and it's a stark reminder of how quickly events can just cascade, how, direct confrontation can suddenly erupt from years of shadow conflict, and the devastating, far-reaching consequences for ordinary people, for civilians caught right in the middle.
Absolutely. This whole deep dive, I think, reveals just how interconnected everything is globally. How conflicts that might seem localized can send shockwaves right across continents, influencing everything from, energy prices and trade routes to the wider political climate.
So, thinking about all this, what does it really mean for you, our listener? Maybe consider this. We live in a world where information just spreads instantly, right? Events unfold at breakneck speed. How does understanding these different interconnected pieces, the strategy, the human impact, the international reactions, how does that help you critically assess the news you see every day and form your own informed opinions about these global crises?